Good afternoon. My name's Al Rogers, and it's my privilege to be here today at the future school now with Alan Kay. Alan Kay is an Apple Fellow. He's the genius behind the Vivarium project, which is an Apple project in Los Angeles that he's going to tell us about. And he does a number of other very interesting things. Alan, I'm really glad to be here with you today.
And nice to be here.
And I've been really curious to find out exactly what is an Apple Fellow and what do you do?
Well, lots of people, sometimes Apple even wonders. But basically, many technology companies have a fellow position. IBM does, and Xerox has 20, IBM has 55. And fellows are supposed to be wild ducks in that they're supposed to be somewhat outside the normal management processes of the company, doing independent things that even that top management might not sanction in order to try and further the goals of the company. And I was a fellow at Xerox before I came to Apple.
So basically, Apple pays you to be Alan Kay and do the things that you do best.
Right. It's the second best job in the world. The best one is just to be funded.
I
Apple
understand.
sincerely hopes I actually do something with it.
I understand. Well, your name is also associated with the Vivarium project, which
yes.
Educators are very curious about. Tell me exactly, what is a vivarium?
Well, vivarium is an honest Latin name like terrarium, and it stands for a protected enclosure in which living things can reside. So it's a little bit like a zoo, and for us it means an environment we're trying to create inside the computer where children can build simulated animals, in particular simulated animal minds, which they can understand how animals work, earn their daily bread, how they interact with the environment and with each other, and so forth.
Where is this Vivarium project actually being conducted?
It's in an inner-city school called the Open Magnet School of Los Angeles, roughly near La Cienega and the Santa Monica Freeway. It's in South Hollywood.
Well, what do teachers and students especially do in the Vivarium school?
Well, first, the school is a terrific school. It was a wonderful school before we got there, and I can't claim that we've improved it much. We chose it because it was a wonderful school. Shows what you can do with a public school and an enlightened principal and social organization that makes it possible. The grades in the school are grades 1 through 6, and they're grouped now into 5 clusters of about 60 kids each. And each of these clusters of 60 children and 2 teachers has a different exploration. Some of them are doing a curriculum called Life Lab that was invented at Santa Cruz. It's in about 40 schools in the state of California. This school has the youngest children doing this, and the Life Lab schools have a farm of their own. The school tore up part of their asphalt playground and actually has a small farm where the 3rd and 4th graders raise plants and vegetables, and there's a fish pond there and so forth. And it's their entry into biology and also into some scientific thinking. And they are in communication with other Life Lab schools around the state via computer network and so forth. So that's an example of a project that can extend over an entire year, and a lot of the curriculum materials that the state of California hopes that they cover can be actually integrated into this project. So the kids don't spend a lot of time drilling on math, but the mathematics that they use comes out of the need for it in this project. Another cluster does the oceanography. These are 4th and 5th graders. And again, it's an ongoing thing that stretches over much of the year. And the computer is not the center of the curriculum in the school, although there are many, many Macintoshes in the school. Every horizontal surface in the school has a Macintosh under a plexiglass plate. But the Macintosh is used in the school as really just another Crayola. It's another medium. It's a dynamic medium, so it does some things that paper and clay can't do. Paper and clay still can do some things it can't do. And all of the curriculum in the school is aimed at the learning processes of the children, and they use every medium that they can get their hands on to help with that. This last year we taught every child and every teacher in the school HyperCard, which is a very nice multimedia system that runs on the Macintosh. And all the children from first grade up through the sixth graders use HyperCard for almost everything they do on the computer. They write things in it, they correlate things together, they program video discs, they do animations in it, they write programs, all of these things.
Approximately how much time during the week would you suppose the students have the opportunity to spend on the computers?
Oh, just unlimited.
Because you really have that many resources in the school.
Yeah, there's no, well, you can imagine the current state of computers in schools is kind of ridiculous if you think of the computer as a pencil. So you have, for instance, schools in which they have a special classroom that has the 30 pencils that the school has, and the kids get to use them 20 or 30 minutes a week. Okay, or a classroom might have 2 pencils and be forced to timeshare. So in this school, as I say, every horizontal surface in the school, so we didn't want to put them on the desks because they get in the way of sight lines, they look too prominent, and there's a tendency when you do that that they get shoved to the side of the room.
So they're actually concealed.
They're underneath a plexiglass top, and so the kids can use the tabletop for doing whatever they want. The computer is always there, always on, for them to use if they want to use it.
How long has this project been in existence, the Vivarium project?
Well, it first, the original ideas go back to around 1982, when the sort of the kernel of it was thought up by Anne Marion, who's now the director of this project. And in between then, she went off to Hewlett-Packard and I went off to Apple, and I saw this school in 1985 and saw that this was the perfect place for this project, and I got funding from Apple, and Anne Marion came to run the project. As far as the school is concerned, we spent the first part of 1986 just trying to understand and work with the teachers. This is our second school year that we're in the school right now.
Going into the project, what did you expect to discover, or what were your objectives in the Vivarium project?
Well, it wasn't to show that computers can save education from itself, that's for sure. It was much more to use the school and the children as an inspiration for design of various kinds. McLuhan said, "I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish." And so we've found in the past that having adults design for adults is not such a great idea, but if you're designing for a group of people where you have to think things out from first principles, then you get much better results. The Macintosh, for instance, in its original incarnation at Xerox, was designed for children. We worked with about 600 children at Xerox PARC in the 70s. And here we're interested in a lot of things, new ways to allow people to control the computer, new ways for self-expression. We're also interested in new ways of thinking about artificial intelligence, because in order for the children to program the minds or the mentalities of these animal creatures that they're simulating, we have to come up with new ways of structuring artificial intelligence programs.
After having been in the project for 2 years, have you been able to draw any conclusions or come up with any results of the project in terms of what you've found out?
Well, I think one of the results was not surprising, since the Macintosh was originally designed for children. I mean, the children of all ages, in fact, we know that children down below the age of 2 can use the Macintosh user interface without any problems. The teachers got quite fluent in the Macintosh also, which I think is a critical thing. We gave each of the teachers a Mac to take home, so they actually have a Mac of their own. I think the thing that surprised me the most, because originally we were only going to do this project in a couple of grades in the school where we ourselves were going to go in and do everything. That's the way we're used to working. Of course, it's much easier that way. But the principal convinced me that we should do the vivarium for the entire school, and I resisted for a while, but then I kept on saying to myself, this is, she wants you to, there's the whole school, it's 6 years, you can follow the first graders, and there's all these longitudinal experiments that can be done and everything. And so finally I said, oh yeah, sure, let's do it for the whole school. And of course, as soon as we did that, we basically then had to do almost everything in the school through the teachers, because there's just no possibility of going in with 10 classrooms. And that first slowed us down so that we thought for a while nothing was going to happen. And then what started to happen is much more richness than we would have ever brought in ourselves. everything that's going on in the classroom is much more real than it would be if we had physically gone in ourselves, because it is actually part of a classroom process. The teachers introduce all of the stuff. We do isolated experiments where we take some kids out and try something out on them, but the mainstream of the stuff happens through every teacher and through every child. And I think the thing I came out with is patience really has its rewards. That I used to try and make an assessment every week, and for a while I thought nothing was happening. Then I realized that I should look every 6 weeks, and when I look every 6 weeks I can see big things happening. That the teachers are, like most teachers, are saturated most of the time. And what they do in this school is that every time they get a little space, they'll put something new in, and that accumulates over the year. Also, the students at the school are taught, they learn how to be proactive about their own learning. So they're able to do an enormous amount of stuff outside the normal classroom process. And so the students were able to carry a lot of these ideas forward. In some cases, even became sources of information for the teachers. The teachers in this school allow that because it's more like coaching, where the athlete is allowed to be better than the coach. Okay, whereas in school you often have a case where the teacher's own feeling of authority rests on how much they know. At this school it's not like that. So my belief is that when you put technology in a school and try to assess what it has done after a year is not the right thing to do. That it really should be thought through in something like a 3-year process. Give the teachers plenty of time, because they really have to fit their learning into their already hectic schedule. And that after 3 years, then I think, especially if the teachers don't have a lot of pressure on them, then I think they'll find ways to use the technology that are very, very central, just as well as they can use any other medium that's there.
You had encouragement from the principal to involve the whole faculty
Right.
early on, but how was this received in the early days by the teachers?
Well, the teachers were pretty enthusiastic. I think the teachers were picked by the principal in this school, and they're part of this very special process that the school had before we showed up. I think that they had a certain amount of trepidation, of course, because, oh no, do we have to also do all of this stuff? As I say, we gave them Macintoshes just to have at home and to play with and stuff, and so there's quite a bit of stuff they could do outside of our own scrutiny. We also ran classes that they could take. We hired them as consultants so that they would feel part of the project and not some sort of slave that we were just using for our own convenience. And there were a whole bunch of things that we did, and as I say, in the first year I wondered what was going on some of the time, and then I was very surprised that the first summer after the first year of how enthusiastic the teachers were about this stuff, and they really plunged in that summer, and started this year with a full head of steam, and it's just been cumulative ever since. So maybe trust is a good word for doing this thing. I think that if we had been trying to prove something with the computers, we might have gotten so close to the teachers in a sort of an untrustworthy fashion, hoping that they would do something, that we might have screwed the whole thing up by getting them so self-conscious that they couldn't learn. But instead we were interested in other things, and so there was enough natural passage of time that everything worked out. And Dave Mintz, who is a fine science teacher in a magnet school. We hired him to be at the school full-time. So he was a teacher that the other teachers knew and respected, who was there to be kind of a backup for answering questions about the technology. He teaches some of the classes. When a computer breaks down, he switches it with a nut. We have spares and so forth.
This is a very interesting description of what sounds like a fantastic project. One of the questions that comes to my mind is what does the average school and the average teacher glean from this experience, when the reality is, using the metaphor of a pencil again, the reality is there is only one per class or 30 per
Right.
school. What kinds of prospects do you think that that teachers are going to have to take advantage of some of the things you're going to be learning
Well,
from?
I think there's several ways of looking at it. One is that when we arrived at the school had a really tiny budget of under $10,000 for everything, not counting the teachers' salaries, and it was in a bunch of temporary bungalows, still is. So the physical plant was meager, but they'd made it attractive. So this school itself, without any technology in it, was sort of a triumph of content over form. Anyway, it was all done by ideas, just as Archimedes only needed some sand to draw in. You don't need much if you've got a good setup. And they didn't. The reason we've done so well with the technology in the schools, they didn't need it. They were doing just fine without us, and we were able to go in there with this idea that we would not do computer-based curriculum at all in the school, but we would have the computer there as a medium. You know, so computer-based curriculum is like saying paper-based curriculum, which is kind of silly because you want to use everything that works. So another way of looking at it is that the computer won't be what it actually is unless the children have unlimited access to it.
I hear what you're saying. What I hear you saying is that basically the resources that teachers have available to them can be used effectively and productively if they approach it with an open mind and with a creative mind, and they can use what they've got in productive, effective ways.
I think that even a few computers in a classroom can be used a little bit, but the problem there is that you have roughly the same overheads and none of the same rewards. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't advocate going as far as just saying it's not worthwhile having computers in a classroom unless you can have 30. But it gets close. I mean, the pencil analogy is a good one. How long do you want the child to go without a pencil? Sooner or later you decide the pencil is valuable enough and you get enough for all the kids.
You mentioned a term that I'd like to pursue briefly for just a moment, and that was a computer-based curriculum. There is a trend, I think, to take a look at some of the major integrated systems that will create a computer lab, provide all of the curriculum, and it becomes a teaching machine.
I don't believe in it for an instant. I think it's way, way off for a number of reasons. And there are several things I think that are wrong with the metaphor. I think first the schools today are too much like Henry Ford's production line as it is, and I think there's too much of this notion that the kids are empty vessels waiting to be filled with knowledge, whereas I view them as active learners that need to be coached and facilitated. But there's nothing that you can do to stuff knowledge inside of kids' head. They have to be able to acquire it. And I think that factory methods are not going to work when they're extended to computers trying to dispense knowledge, because I don't believe there is such a thing as knowledge. What there are processes inside people's heads. Knowledge isn't a substance just because it's a noun. And so I think that's, number one, I don't think that's a good idea. Number two, I think the idea of a computer lab is, again, as ridiculous as having a pencil lab. It just simply doesn't have anything to do with what the computer actually is. And third, the idea that one of the goals of having computers is computer familiarity, in the sense of knowing what they are and knowing how to use a word processor on it, completely misses the point of what the computer is. It's like saying a book is a thing you can get information from, whereas to me a book is that thing that you can get different points of view from. There's a huge difference from thinking of a book as a repository of facts and thinking of it as a point of view. And the computer is much more that point of view kind of transformer.
There is a tremendous tension right now between the viewpoint that you've just expressed regarding the fact that the purpose of schools is to help students develop concepts, learn, acquire knowledge, versus the empty vessel sort of a thing, which perhaps might be characterized by the criteria of test scores and achievement scores and so on, which is a reality that teachers and schools and administrators have to face today.
Yeah, but there's nothing cosmic. Reality is just something that human beings make up and decide that it is. I mean, there's nothing cosmic about a test score. the man from Arcturus never heard of TESS. So I think it's much more an understanding of trying to first understand the goals, and even today I think it would be very helpful for school boards and stuff to try and understand the difference between education and vocational training, which I think is totally and hopelessly confused. They're not the same thing at all, and training and education are different, and both have their place. Ben Franklin called it the difference between the useful and the ornamental.
There are so many avenues of topics here to pursue, but I'd like to back up a moment and pick up on an idea that you were expressing just a few moments ago that reminded me of Seymour Papert.
Mm-hmm.
I get the impression that the kind of discovery, the use of the computer as a heuristic tool to explore spatial and numerical and verbal relationships and so on, is very similar to
Mm-hmm.
Seymour Papert's views of logo as a learning tool.
Right. Very similar. I got started doing this stuff with kids because of visiting Seymour Papert in '68 in Massachusetts, and one of his first logo installations. And a lot of inspiration. Seymour's been a colleague over the years. A couple of differences are that the psychologist that I have been following over the years that I've gotten a lot of inspiration from is Jerome Brunner. Seymour's has been Piaget. And I think the other difference is that Seymour has a much stronger belief that just giving the kids logo and letting them explore it will actually do the job. And I don't think that actually works out that well. I think it is very, very difficult to come up with an environment so well constructed that simply the exploring of it will get all of the good stuff. And so I believe in something much more like the coaching thing, where you see other people doing it, where there is some facilitation, there's some thought about what a good person, an expert, might do, and it's not trying to tell the children how to be an expert, but you try and set up pathways where they can gain expertise and a large measure of happiness by doing so.
What are the pitfalls, in your opinion, at this point in time, of technology in schools? What are the dangers that are facing the schools?
Yeah, well, I think the basic pitfall is the people that want to believe that it's some sort of Band-Aid or magic ointment put over a wound that isn't going to heal. And I don't think technology can fix education at all. We're a country that likes to fix things rather than to reveal. We care more about performance than awareness, and I think all of those things are a big problem. And the analogy I used in the talk this morning was if the parents of the state of California wanted their kids to be musicians by the time they finished high school, we can imagine the state legislature, after a lot of being beat on, saying, okay, we have a solution, we'll put a piano in every classroom. Unfortunately, we can't hire musicians to do this, but what we'll do is we'll give the existing teachers 2-week refresher courses, and we all know what will happen, right? The teachers will come up with behavioral objectives, and they'll eventually decide maybe that, well, I've heard of the C major scale, maybe we should teach that, we can get a nice bell curve, and we can give grades just like the state of California wants us to. And the whole problem, that's all too good an analogy with the way the computer is being treated. Buy the technology, put it in the classroom, don't get anybody who really knows what the stuff is, have only one piano for the 30 kids, and the major thing that gets left out is music never gets in the door. And if music doesn't get in the door, what is the use of having the piano there? The piano has turned more people against music than towards it because of just those methods. The thought that there's music in the piano. If there was music in the piano, we'd have to let it vote. Right? There isn't music in the piano. Music is in us or not, and we have to get that going before we can be amplified by any kind of instrument.
What, briefly, as we come near the end of this period, what would you say are the major potentials of technology, particularly computers in the schools?
Well, no higher than what the book did to the Middle Ages. I mean, in other words, the sky is actually the limit. I think that the important thing about a transforming technology like the book is to have it be in such a physical state that it can't be controlled. it's one of the important, the modern size of a book was actually thought up by a guy by the name of Aldus, who was a Venetian printer. And that size was much smaller than what books had been before, because Aldus realized that now books didn't have to be chained to the walls. They could be the size of a saddlebag. And that's why the books we buy are this size. They're the size of the saddlebags back then. And Aldus probably did as much as anybody to change the world from its medieval point of view to somewhat of the point of view we have today. And I think that's, when books are controlled by schools, all too often the teacher will say, read this book, or use this textbook, because they very often won't want multiple points of view. And to me, the big message of a book is not one book, but multiple books, that you can go, this guy says this guy says this. Each point of view gives you something. As my old friend Marvin Minsky at MIT likes to say, you don't understand something unless you understand it more than one way.
Well, this has been extremely interesting. Very briefly, in the next few seconds, I was wondering if you'd be able to share with us some of your other major projects that you're currently working on.
Well, I get most of my best ideas when I work on computing systems for people who don't ordinarily get computing in a reasonable way. So I've not ever done a computing system for businessmen, although of course people use the Macintosh all the time in business. But I have worked on systems for senior citizens, worked on systems for women, small businesses, and so forth. And all of those groups are grist for the mill. We're even doing a system for Coco the gorilla.
Well, this has been a very interesting period of conversation with you, Alan Kay. I appreciate having been here with you. It's been my privilege and pleasure, and we hope that you've enjoyed this videotape also. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you.